protocol, the bad random numbers. Here we are attacking statistical weaknesses, things that cryptographers would probably have found if this had been analyzed by cryptographers before, and weaknesses that you would want to avoid. For those of you that know a little bit more of cryptography, what we're really exploiting here is the lack of non-linearity, mostly. That complexity doesn't add up over many rounds, but that everything is connected through XOR, which is a linear function. Okay, moving on. To sum up the MIFARE weaknesses, this is not an example of a system where a little thing went wrong and now it's exploitable and needs a patch. This is an example of a system where pretty much every building block is fundamentally flawed. So this entire system consists of broken building blocks, and the different attacks are enabled by either single broken building blocks or the interaction of different ones. But this is probably a great example to study and to try out attacks, and a very warning example for anybody who attempts to do cryptography themselves. So here's a summary of things that you can do wrong if you try to do cryptography. MIFARE, however, is not a lone example and a one-time mistake in an industry that would otherwise come up with good products. Pretty much any RFID card that claims to be secure, with the exception of very recent ones, uses proprietary and uses weak encryption. And this is really a summary of the entire market. Newer installations, the ones that are maybe 2 or 3 years old, they might already be using standard ciphers. AES, NXP calls that the Deathfire card, for instance. Logic has some 13 megahertz cards that do AES. HID has some newer cards. But pretty much any installation that you'll find out there so far that uses secure RFID is breakable, and probably breakable with the very techniques I've just listed. So there's a lot more work to do, and if you are an active user of any of these systems, be aware of that. And if you're an active hacker with too much time, please help us attack some more of these.
Yeah, and it's not really true that most new installations are using secure systems, because these usually are slightly more expensive, and if you show that to a bureaucrat who says but it says secure on both of them, so we take the less expensive one, they'll usually use MIFARE Classic or the Logic old or the HID old system, or they have a systems integrator who doesn't know squat about anything and uses the old cards and doesn't have the new cards. So for example, my university is building a new building, and they are using the only two options they said would be UID, serial number based, or MIFARE Classic cryptography. Deathfire was never an option.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there are some proposed mitigations for short-term efforts, not for long-time replacements, but for short-time mitigation until you're ready to roll out the new system. Some vendors are already offering this, for example, under the name of Digitale Signatur, or digital signature, which isn't really necessary. What they basically do is check the UID, because those two systems fall into two classes: those that only check the UID, and those that use the cryptography but don't care about the UID at all. So now they have a new idea: let's use the cryptography and the UID. And the way they do that is not by checking the UID in the backend system, because that would be much more complicated, but they simply put the UID onto the card and digitally sign it with some key. So that if you modify the card contents or simply copy the card onto your new card, which was an attack that was very viable previously. For example, the Dutch demonstrated that on their university system, and then the Dutch Minister of the Interior kind of noticed that they are using the same system and put up armed guards on all entrances. So for these systems, it's short-time mitigation technology to sign the UID or any other data that you are putting on the card, and not rely on the MIFARE Classic access control mechanism. So you don't rely on that it wouldn't be writable, but just assume that it's writable and then sign it and check the signature for all valid state. And there's another technology that might be possible, maybe somewhat more complicated. I think there was a talk on day one about it, on RF fingerprinting, where you try to detect certain characteristics on the radio frequency spectrum and try to detect emulators. As we said, the UID can be spoofed if you're emulating the card and not copying simply the content onto a new card. So if you're doing RF fingerprinting, you might be able to detect that there is an emulator in place and then can decline the card. Or if they don't have an emulator, they most likely have the wrong UID, so you can detect that too.
Yeah. So the idea here is to use external cryptography that the card doesn't really understand, but where it only has to store the data, to sign data and make sure that every state that a state that the card claims it has at the moment existed at some point in time. If you then also can tie it to the card itself, the only attack vector would be to use an emulator, in which case you want to do radio fingerprinting to perhaps detect everything other than RFID cards. So these are both techniques that don't work 100% and that are probably circumventable, but from our experience of building emulators, it's really hard to get them exactly 100% right. And if you just implemented these, you're one step ahead of the hackers, and you bought yourself a little extra time to replace MIFARE with something else, but you don't get around doing that. You might just have some more time. Knowing that people want to migrate away from MIFARE Classic, we've been looking around for possible platforms to use to build, say, the next generation RFID system from. And we've been shocked to see that most systems tie an RFID reader IC to the cards. So every time your cards get compromised, you also throw away your reader infrastructure and basically start from scratch. We thought this was an untakeable state, and so we went about implementing one of the first, perhaps the first, mostly software-driven RFID reader, where we implement MIFARE Classic as a software module on this RFID reader by Texas Instruments, so since MIFARE Classic is just a software component in here, if you want to replace your MIFARE Classic card with something else, you just flash these devices, and you could probably, if you designed your reader based on these ICs, do this wirelessly or through the reader network. So here's an idea that we hope will catch on in the industry, to build RFID readers more software-based and to make them more flexible so you can quicker react to security breaches. Because as I've shown, MIFARE Classic is not the only weak card, and even the cards that we today think are at least cryptographically strong, those will come up with their own problems, and they'll need to be replaced at some point. Another nice application of this reader, since everything is in software, you can change tiny bits and you can make it behave slightly wrong, which I guess software people call fuzz testing. Hasn't been done much in RFID yet, but say you wanted to fuzz test your NFC phone, this would be the reader to do it with, to start changing things, maybe send an extra bit where it doesn't belong and see how the phone behaves. These implementation, these software stacks are full of bugs, I'm sure. The software we're using on this has been posted to my website yesterday, so feel free to download that, play around with it. It has a full MIFARE Classic implementation in it, and we are selling these devices for 50 euros downstairs at the Furbu, where all the T-shirts hang. And we will have a workshop tomorrow to help you all get started with these. So buy one today or tomorrow morning, come to a workshop. This will be 1:45 in the workshop area, and we'll show you what software you need, how to compile the source code, and how to maybe start building your own RFID fuzz tester. Yeah, so that's the first tool we're releasing. Thanks.
Yeah, the second tool is the OpenPICC, which we have already talked about a lot in the last years. And it was originally designed as an RFID emulator that should be able to emulate any RFID card in the 13.456 megahertz range. Unfortunately, I didn't get it to work. As we said, the timing of RFID emulators is kind of hard, and until now I've worked on it mostly the most part of the last year, and I didn't get it to work properly so that it works reliable. It works like 80% of the time, but that's not exactly good enough for most attacks. So that's not so nice. But what I did get working is to do a full duplex RFID sniffing on that. That's kind of a side effect, an unwanted side effect, because normally when you build an RFID emulator, you only want to receive the RFID reader signal. And what we found is that if you put a card, another RFID card, like really close to that, like so, I have double-sided sticky tape on here below that, so I hope it sticks. Really close to that, you'll also receive the signal that the other card sends. And then I implemented firmware that simply receives the signal and sends it to USB, which sounds simpler than it is, and is received by a host application on the PC, and I basically get a radio receiver for 13.56 megahertz that can do amplitude demodulation and sample the demodulated signal at 3.3 megasamples per second, binary signal. And if you set the threshold value just right and choose the distance between the card and sniffer and the reader just right, it's slightly complicated now. Still, I'm going to make that easier. If you choose the distance just right, you receive the signal both of the reader device and of the card, and you have a full duplex sniffer for not a lot of money. Unfortunately, we don't have much of these left. I think we have about 2 of these left, which we need for our own purposes, but we're going to build new ones, and they will be released in January about, probably.
And if you already have one, here's the URL to download the most recent firmware.
Yeah, that's not yet in there, the sniffing for both directions. That's only the code for sniffing in one direction, but I'll add the code for sniffing both directions shortly. And what you will get is, as I said, amplitude demodulation, transmission of the signal to the host. On the host there's an application running that's decoding and demangling the samples, and you get an output that basically has all zeros and ones for all the samples, and you get an output that has all the changes in the signal, and then you get an application that uses these deltas times to decode the protocols and probably decode ISO 14443A, so you get a full duplex ISO 14443A dump that you then can use with the other tool, the algebraic crack tool, to break MIFARE encryption, for example. I already did that yesterday for somebody. So if you have a card and a reader, that's the problem. If you have a card and a reader with you, you can just find me and I will break your key for you. My DECT phone is 5015.
For those that didn't get it now, if you are the legitimate owner of a MIFARE card that you lost the key to, this is the device that gets you the data out of your card again. So that was the OpenPIC that has been sold out in the web shop a long time ago, and that is now being reproduced. But Milos and Britta Meriab, the sleepless ingenious hardware designers, they have come up with the OpenPIC 2, which just blows me away. But let Henrik tell you about it.
Yeah, the OpenPIC-2 is a dual multi-purpose device. It's kind of like a multi-application card, if you know that term from smart card vendors. What you get on there, you have a processor, an RTI91 processor, with 48 megahertz frequency. You get 16 megabytes of SD-RAM. You get an SD card slot in the back. Let me show that here. That's the